Welcome to Conscious Conversations, and my name's Luke McLean. I'm a coach. I do a lot of work in the leadership, culture, and wellness space. Working with teams to build culture and leaders on their wellness, and how to not just build a culture but sustain and maintain a culture, which is really important. And I love that, and I love the idea around performance. And this is why today I'm so excited to welcome Rich Diviney, because Rich is the epitome of performance. He's 20 years a Navy SEAL. He completed 13 overseas deployments, 11 of which were in Iraq or Afghanistan. And that career took him to be the commanding officer of the Navy SEALs. So that's, if anyone doesn't know, like the SEALs are like the SAS for the Navy in America. This is high pressure, literal life and death stuff. So you know when I had the chance to sit down with Rich and talk about his work now that he's doing with his book called Attributes, where he talks about the attributes we need to be successful, and understanding that, and when we've got awareness of what are those attributes and how do we lean into them more, how do we unlock and uncover them and get to know ourselves better, but also get to know the work that we're really meant to do. He does a lot of work with recruiting teams and big companies on understanding, jobs that are needed, and to really perform at that job, what are the attributes that you need, and then trying to find the people that have those attributes, because attributes are different to skills. You can teach the skills, but a lot of the attributes we have are innate. And we've got them all, but we've got higher levels of certain attributes which hold us in better stead in certain positions. So there's no good or bad attributes, but there are more applicable attributes for certain things. If you're a Navy SEAL, you need certain attributes. If you're a nurse, you need a different set of attributes, and making sure you find, I guess, the right ones. So that's what I really loved about this conversation. Rich's understanding of leadership. He talks about his leadership model, which is incredible, and he talks about the difference between peak performance and optimal performance, and why, especially as a SEAL, but for us, optimal performance is really what we're after day in, day out, because peak is an apex. We can only get there and we come back down. But how do we elevate to lead and live in optimal performance, and what that looks and feels like? So this is a real leadership, high performance conversation. So I hope you like it. My name is Luke McLean. This is Conscious Conversations, and you're going to listen to Rich Diviney. Take care. Rich, really excited to have you on, mate. You've sort of captured attributes as your wheelhouse for work right now, but the background of attributes and how you got there from being a SEAL, and not just being a SEAL, but what seems to be that you took up a real leadership position in the SEALs or in the Army, which was interesting. Could you just give the listeners a little bit of background as to how you've got to the attributes work that you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, I was a Navy SEAL for just under 21 years, and an officer in the team. So I was in a bunch of different leadership positions. However, at one point in my career, about midway through, I was asked to take charge of a assessment and selection process for one of our very elite specialized SEAL commands. And at this particular command, what would happen is we'd get candidates, SEAL candidates, so SEALs from all the other teams would apply to come to our command and go through our own selection process. And that selection process was about 9 months long, and it was about a 50% attrition rate, which is okay because any selection process implies attrition. But what wasn't okay was that the command at that time and for many years, had not been able to effectively articulate why the 50% who weren't making it weren't making it. And they were coming up with things like, well, they couldn't shoot very well, couldn't do this, couldn't that. And all these excuses were very skills based, and it didn't make sense because, again, these are already Navy SEALs. They're very experienced. They know how to shoot. They know. So to say you couldn't shoot very well wasn't leaving a good taste in anybody's mouth. And so when I took over, they asked me to look more deeply into the program and see if I could articulate it. And in doing so, I had to really ask myself, okay, what is it about performance that we're missing? And this is when I began to think, okay, there's something here that we're actually looking for that we're not able to explain. And I could only kind of think back to my own experience in SEAL training. So basic SEAL training. This is again moving backwards. Not the training I was running, but basic SEAL training is the is the training that a Navy sailor goes through to become a Navy SEAL in the first place. That's done in San Diego, California. That has a 90% attrition rate, and so only 10% make it through. You spend hundreds of hours running around with big, heavy boats on your heads, and running around with 300-pound telephone poles, and exercising with those, and freezing in the surf zone. And at the time, I thought to myself, well, I had at that moment in my career had done hundreds of combat missions, thousands of training evolutions, and never once had I carried a heavy boat on my head or a 300-pound telephone pole. So what they were doing to us in SEAL training was not training us in the skills to be Navy SEALs. They were teasing out these qualities that were kind of hidden, these attributes, so to speak. And this is when I began to say, okay, there's a difference between skills and attributes. Attributes are these hidden qualities that are harder to see, yet they are actually, in fact, what drive most of our performance at all times, but especially during challenge, stress, and uncertainty.
And I was just going to get to that, Rich, where I think you talk about the attributes, which really resonated with me and with what the SEALs naturally do, is that challenge, stress, and uncertainty actually brings these attributes to life. Does it also, like from a skills perspective, does the attributes and skills come together where someone might be able to shoot, for instance, when there wasn't the challenge, stress, and uncertainty, they might be great shots then, but the attributes and the skills come together to create the real outcome in that moment?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. So that's really what talent is. Talent is a merger of skills and attributes. So I think it might be fair for your audience just for me to define the terms here. Skills are not inherent to our nature. In other words, we're not born with the ability to ride a bike or throw a ball or shoot a gun in the military case. We're trained to do those things. We're taught to do those things. Skills also direct our behavior in known and specific environments. Here's how and when to throw a ball or ride a bike or shoot a gun. And then because they're very visible, they're very easy to measure and assess. You can see how well anybody does any one of those things. What skills don't tell us is how we're going to show up in stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill. This is when we lean on our attributes. Attributes are inherent to our nature. So all of us are born with levels of patience, situational awareness, resilience, adaptability. Certainly we can develop these things over time and experience, but you can see levels of this stuff in very small children, which means there's a nature nurture element to attributes. Attributes don't direct our behavior. Attributes inform our behavior. They tell us how we're going to show up to a situation and an environment. So in other words, my son's levels of resilience and adaptability and perseverance informed the way he showed up when he was learning the skill of riding a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. And then because they're hidden in the background, they're very hard to assess, measure, and test. They're the most visible and visceral during times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty, when skills can't be applied, right? But in any case, true talent, I mean, the professional football player or baseball player isn't that person just because they can kick a ball really far, or score a goal, or throw a ball really fast. Many people can throw a ball fast. Many people can kick a ball hard. They are that because there's a merger of their skills and their attributes, their situational awareness, their adaptability, these hidden qualities, these intangible things. And this is what drives performance on every level, even when it's not stressful. I mean, even in a regular everyday life, it's driving our behavior, our performance, but they're just the most visible during stress, challenge, and uncertainty.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Rich. And we'll get to there in a minute, but I'm just like, what was it like for you then to do that work in the SEALs, and to sort of, did you stumble across attributes as the defining difference, and then how did you have a whole heap of them at the start and then have to refine them? Like, I'd love to know how you got to where you got to with the book and the 25.
Yeah. Well, so when I kind of figured this out while I was running SEAL training, what I did is that, okay, we have to figure out as a command what attributes we're looking for in the person for this command. Because I knew that list is going to look different. The attributes required for a Navy SEAL are going to look different than the attributes required for a librarian or a teacher or whatever. So the first thing I did was I brought together committees at the command of SEALs and said, hey, just give me a list of the attributes you think SEALs need at this command. And they all turned in their lists. I had 100+ things. Now, a lot of them had mixed into that skills, right? Because again, they're easy to conflate. And kind of a quick back of the envelope test to determine whether or not it's an attribute or a skill is to ask yourself, can I teach it or can it be taught? So if the answer is yes to that question, it's probably a skill. If the answer is no, it's probably an attribute. So the idea would be, Luke, you could say, Rich, I want to learn how to shoot a pistol and hit a bullseye, right? Well, I could take you to the range and teach you how to do that within a couple hours. Okay, that's a skill. Or you could say, Rich, I want to learn how to be more patient or more adaptable. I can't teach you how to do that, right? That's an attribute. And so what happened was that we just basically culled the list down to what the actual attributes were, took away the synonyms and things like that, and really ended up with 36 attributes that we're looking for in our SEAL candidates. And that really changed the game for us in what we were doing and looking at. Now, fast forward, I got out of the Navy, that was, 10 years later. I'm in the leadership and culture space, but I'm really still keyed into this performance stuff. And so I'm talking about high performing teams. And I'm realizing as I talk to businesses and teams that they're saying, "Hey, Rich, we're putting together these dream teams of people, right? The best marketing person, best graphics designer, best whatever." And they're actually doing well when things are going well, but as soon as things go sideways, they turn toxic. They start to fall apart, and we don't know what's going on. I said, well, it's easy to know what's going on because you're putting together your team based on the wrong things. You're putting together your team based on skills, and when it comes to teamwork and team interaction, it's attributes that drive the interaction. And I kind of always say it. A system or a team is never just the sum of its parts. It's a product of their interaction. So you can put all the best parts of every team together, and it falls apart. It's all about, if they don't interact, they fall apart. We've seen this in sports analogies. So I knew that there was a book in there. I could talk about it, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to take it out of the SEAL environment and kind of ubiquitize it for just all of us as human beings. And so that's when I kind of said, okay, let's talk about optimal performance for humans, and what are the attributes that really drive our performance, our optimal performance in everyday life. And so that's what the impetus of the book was. It came out to be about 25 attributes, and instead of 36, and it was fun. It was fun to write and put together.
Yeah, it's an incredible book, and I think we'll talk about this in a minute. But I think about like the self-awareness you get from the attributes of discovery of yourself, but also what you're sort of saying too is the connection of what makes a great team. And I'm interested, Rich, like in the SEALs or when you work with a team, do you want diversity of attributes in a collective team, or do you want connected attributes of, say, for instance, in the SEALs or it's in a team, do you want similar attributes as they've all got similar ones, or do you want a diverse range to make a better team, or is SEALs a little bit different to a company?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is a little bit of both. And this is actually the work we do with companies. The work we do is we go into businesses and organizations and help them figure out what that attribute list looks like for them specifically. And what you'll find when you do that process is that a small list of attributes, usually between 3 and 5 or so, maybe 6 or 7, filter up to the top as the most important, the most critical. In other words, you can't be on this team unless you have these, right? But then there's these kind of what we call mission enhancing, mission essential attributes. It's like, okay, you can still be on the team if you don't have these. What you want to do is find team members that actually complement each other. So in other words, one person can be a little lower on patience as long as there's another person who has high patience, because again, sometimes the environment's going to require impatience, and sometimes the environment's going to require patience, which is when team members know when to step up. So it really is a process of figuring out for a team what those critical attributes are. Everybody needs it. In the SEAL teams, for example, a critical attribute need is compartmentalization. In fact, you can't make it through SEAL training unless you are massively able to compartmentalize. I mean, and so those who can't do it don't make it through SEAL training. So every Navy SEAL, there's specific attributes that every single Navy SEAL has to have. And then it's about, making a team where we actually start to diversify a little bit and we become able to really deal with any situation.
And in the SEALs, I know we want to talk more about teams in everyday life, but in the SEALs these days, would they be picking teams based on the mission, based on the attributes needed for that mission? Would they be specific mission based, for instance, or even if it was in a company, we're working on this project, we're really clear about what we need to deliver. Here are the attributes that are going to best suit this project. Here are the people that have those attributes. Let's put them together.
Yeah, typically what happens in the SEAL teams, and it's the same in the Australian SAS and any special forces, is that you have platoons or troops of guys, and that troop trains together and gets to a competence level together where they are able to do pretty much any mission that comes their way. So missions are basically given to a troop versus I'm going to handpick. There's only one case that I've ever heard of where a mission was handpicked, and that was the Bin Laden raid.
Right.
And those were, those are all my buddies, but when they thought about putting together the guys going on that raid, and I should say they were all picked from the same team or the same squadron, but they were kind of saying, we're going to take this guy. They picked their 23 guys very specifically based on what they thought they needed. But they were still from the same overall squadron, so it wasn't too much different. But overall, what you'll find is the teams are set up in a manner in which any platoon, any troop can deal with whatever mission comes down their way.
Yeah, great. And in the work that you do now, Rich, in terms of attributes identification based on the role and how to, I'd imagine there's got to be an element of efficiency in that, of how you identify, this is the role, this is the team, here's the attributes. In a workplace, they don't have a lot of time to spend 6 or 12 months identifying those attributes because they're in the hustle and bustle of it. Is that the work that you also do, is how to create systems to identify that quickly?
Well, what we do is we'll go in an organization and we'll do it in one day. We'll sit down with the organization. We'll do a one-day process where we help them figure out what that attribute list looks like, and then from there we give them some tools to start understanding how to effectively look at each role at each position. Because again, each position is going to have a little bit of a different flavor, right? The executive director's attributes and skills are going to look a little different than the salesperson's or the accountants, right? There's still going to be some core ones that everybody needs, but each role. So we give them a little bit of we give them some tools on how to look at each role, and then if they're interested in follow-on work, we'll help them start looking at how to redesign their hiring processes to start looking specifically for attributes. Because again, most hiring processes make the mistake of looking mostly at skills, and we're going to pick the best resume, best this, best that, and you're not, and there's some things you are missing if you're just looking at the visible. You have to start understanding how to look at the periphery, which is where attributes kind of lie.
Absolutely, yeah. It makes, when you think about it, it makes so much sense after reading the book on where recruiting goes wrong, where teams struggle or get challenged because of, there's an element of skills, but the attributes aren't connecting and they're not working for the project or for the people.
And you can always, and there are certain skills you can always train. There's a story I like to tell from basic SEAL training. So basic SEAL training is called BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL Training, and that's that 6-month process, 90% attrition rate. I went through that training in 1996, so I'm an old guy. But and this story that I heard happened before I went through. And so one of the things you had to do when you first showed up to SEAL training was you had to swim 50 meters. And the story goes that this kid shows up, and it's his turn to swim, and when he jumps into the pool, he sinks right to the bottom, and he starts walking across the bottom of the pool to one side and then walks across the bottom of the pool back to the other side. He comes up, he's gasping for air and nearly drowning, and the instructor looks at him and says, "What the hell are you doing?" And the kid looks at the instructor and says, "I'm sorry, instructor, I don't know how to swim." And the instructor pauses for a second and looks at him and says, "That's okay, we can teach you how to swim," right? Yeah. And the reason why he says that is because the instructor knew that this kid, that even though he didn't have the skills, teaching him how to swim was easy, right? He had all the attributes this kid needed to make it through SEAL training. So that, okay, this kid, we can easily teach. I mean, swimming's the easy part, right? This guy, we know this kid. If this kid has the balls to show up to SEAL training, not knowing how to swim, then he has everything we need, And so the idea is, in a lot of cases, attributes, skills. The way I kind of define it is skills tell us what they show us and tell us what is, whereas attributes show us and tell us what could be. Right. So if you're looking for potential, you need to look at attributes. Skills just say this is what is, right? But if you want to look beyond what is into what could be and into the periphery, you have to look at attributes.
Because I'd imagine, Rich, this is relevant to businesses, sporting teams, where, and it's funny, you see this in sport all the time. These guys come from the same universities or the same, and their skill sets are very, very similar. Yeah, they've played against each other for years. In companies, you recruit someone, the skill sets look similar on paper, but the outcome and what they can deliver varies differently based on the environment they're in. Also, probably the attributes they've got is really what makes the big difference. And you would have seen this in BUDS, where physically and mentally these guys were easy to make it, but then they fall off because they don't have the attributes to do it.
to do it. Yeah. Well, and again, attributes help us deal with uncertainty. Much more than skills, because again, that's what we lean upon. And so I'd say sports. I think athletics is a great example. Although I will say athletics is one of those examples where you can actually get away in sports with a little bit more skill. Okay. In other words, percentage of skill in athletics is higher than normal in terms of other environments because what are sports? Sports are highly certain. There's nothing uncertain about sports.
Mm.
You're on a field. There's boundaries. There's time limits. There's you know exactly what's going on, and inside of that environment, you can master very certain skills. Now, certainly, there's attributes that make that distinguish the amateur from the pro. But when you talk about where attributes really come into play, it's in environments of uncertainty, and that's where the Navy SEALs really dominate. In fact, I've always nicknamed the Navy SEALs. In fact, this is probably going to be the title of my second book, but I call them masters of uncertainty. And the idea is to be a master of uncertainty, you have to understand what attributes you bring to the table, because when you drop into an uncertain environment, the first thing you have to do is figure it out. Right? There's no skill you can apply into an unknown environment because, okay, what do I do? Attributes help you with that process. So attributes become a lot more important on teams, organizations, and environments where uncertainty is a lot more predominant. And you can, and in the latter case where things are pretty certain, skills you can usually get away with a little heavier lean towards skills.
Yeah, okay. I'm just reflecting on that because the work that you do, and also what I do is around leadership. And so much of leadership's how you can operate, optimally in uncertainty, because you're a leader. And just, I'm interested in, you've got leadership as almost a bucket of attributes.
Yeah.
Are they directly the necessary, attributes you need to be a good leader, or are there other attributes that connect to, that you've found connect to also be really essential for great leadership?
Yeah, there are other ones. I talk about five. I think one of the things the way I talk about leadership, the way I've experienced leadership, is that leadership is not a position. Leadership is a behavior. And so in other words, there's a difference between being in charge and being a leader. And anyone can be in charge, and you can actually self-designate. You can say, I'm in charge, right? You can't do the same thing with leadership. You can't self-designate. To say I'm a leader is the same as saying I'm good looking or funny. Okay, other people decide whether or not you are good looking or funny. Other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow, and they do so based on the way you behave. And I always tell you, if you call yourself a leader and you look back and there's no one following you, I got bad news for you. You're not a leader, right? So in the work we've done, and I'm so grateful coming out of the Navy, I did a lot of my focused work in leadership and culture. And I know I've really skewed a little bit towards performance, but it involves leadership, of course. But we used to go around the country, around the world, and ask audiences, what do great leaders do? We just ask that simple question. And we'd get people just shout out answers. And oftentimes we'd have a whiteboard next to us. We just write down what they said. And we just write down a list of the behaviors that they threw up there. And what's interesting is no matter where we went in the world, the list was always the same. Didn't matter who we were talking to, didn't matter what generation we were talking to, that list was always the same things. Now, these 5 attributes that I talk about were always on that list, and they were always in the top 10. Those were empathy, selflessness, authenticity, decisiveness, and accountability. Those were always there, right? And so there are others, of course, right? I mean, and the way you figure that out is you just simply say, okay, think of someone you consider a leader, right? Think of a great leader that you really consider a great leader. What do they do? Start writing that list down. Do that, and you'll be looked. So I always say, if you want to be a leader, then you have to behave like one, and then people will choose you as that. And in the Navy, I was an officer, which meant I was always in charge of something, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not I was a leader depended on those people who were in my span of care, and whether or not they chose me and they said, "You're someone I want to follow." And I know most people can say that they've had this experience. I certainly did in the military, where you look at that person who is they're in a hierarchical position above you, and you look at that person, you say, I wouldn't follow that person anywhere, right? Meanwhile, you look over there to the person at the water cooler who has no hierarchical position whatsoever, and you say, I'd follow that person to hell and back. It's because of the way they behave, right? And so that's how we become leaders. And I kind of say leaders are neither born nor taught; they are chosen, right? So you can't. It's not. You're not born a leader. You don't learn. It's not taught to be a leader. You're chosen to be a leader, and you do so based on these behaviors.
Do you think, Rich, that also like, so I love the concept of behavioral leadership, like it is about behaviors. Do you see the same thing? I know this is a little bit off topic, but do you see the same thing with values? Like values, people, companies establish values, but they're just words.
Yeah,
They mean
yeah,
nothing unless the behaviors connect to the words. If anything, they can
100%.
they can polarize if the behaviors don't connect to the words.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, that's a lot of the work we do with organizations in terms of attributes involves also looking at values as well, because you have to basically distill what those behaviors are, and then you have to ask yourself, okay, what are the behaviors of this organization? It's all about how you behave. I mean, again, the this all this stuff lies underneath our, and I kind of, if all of us were to kind of visualize the iceberg, and if we were looking at the iceberg, the whole iceberg, so we're looking at the part of the iceberg that's above the water, and then the massive part that's below the water, right? At the bottom of that iceberg below the water would sit attributes, right? And the attributes start to inform our values, and our values start to inform our perception, our feelings,
Mm.
and our feelings inform our perceptions, and then our perceptions inform our behavior. But the only thing visible to everybody else is behavior.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so if you're not behaving it, then they're just words on a wall.
yeah. But there is, yeah, as you sort of just said, there's a lot that goes underneath that behavior,
Totally.
which is outcome. Which I think what you're sort of saying is a lot of leaders and companies don't do that under the iceberg work to really understand what manifests.
And even worse, some of them don't even behave that way, right? And again, if you're
Yeah.
if you're a leader not behaving in that way, then it's kind of like the old adage, they don't, people don't do what you say, they do what you do. Any of
Mm.
us who are parents, by the way, know
Yeah.
this. Our kids model our behavior. They don't necessarily do what we say. So that's why we have to be very careful in terms of what our behavior is around our kids. Same thing with leadership positions.
Do you think, Rich, like in companies, but even in life, we've sort of got really attached to convenience, trying to make things as simple and convenient as we possibly can, trying to remove any challenge, stress, or uncertainty from our lives. So we're really sort of trying to place ourselves in this bubble physically, mentally, financially. Um, and we don't get the chance to stress, to get into discomfort and challenge. So when it does happen, we're not practiced at it, and we actually don't have the awareness of what our actual attributes are, and they're not
Yes.
practiced.
Yes, 100%. I mean, we are. I mean, and we'll just. It's a human thing. Humans love
Mm.
certainty. We all do.
Yeah.
I mean, everything about our existence is about figuring out environment and understanding. And when we don't understand, there's stress involved in that. And so it's natural for us to generate and create as much certainty in our environment as possible, because that's comfort for us. Those folks who aren't tuned in and dialed into that, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you're not tuned in and dialed into the fact that discomfort, stress, anxiety, and even fear are actually designed by nature to do things for us. They actually
Mm.
help get us moving. The fear, for example, it's a risk assessment tool for us, right? It allows us to say there's risk here. Anxiety is designed to get us up and moving. I mean, the reason why we feel anxious and uncomfortable when we're hungry is designed to get us up to go find food. Same thing when anxious and uncomfortable when we're lonely. It's designed to get us up and go find companionship. And so a lot of us tend to forget the power of and the meaning behind anxiety, fear, stress, uncertainty, and to be able to deliberately step into that once in a while. It's really quite. It's where growth happens. And in fact, we're designed. Again, our neurology, our brains give us a dopamine reward every time we step into our fear. We get a dopamine reward. I mean,
Mm.
our body gives us a reward. And again, dopamine, it's not a reward chemical, it's a motivation chemical. It says, this is good, keep doing this. But
Yeah.
there's a reason behind that. This is the reason why we've gone from cave dwellers to space explorers, is because we're designed to
Yeah.
step into what we fear. And so I think every person who has the ability to, and I say not everybody does, because some people are still, no kidding, in survival mode, right? But any of us who are in kind of first world situations where we actually have the ability and the resources to be able to stop and take a look and say, you know what, I want to grow. I want to deliberately step into discomfort and fear. I got everything else taken care of. I don't have to worry about my
Mm.
essentials, right? let me just start growing myself. Again, you and I, we do this at the gym every day, right? We just don't recognize it. We go to the gym, we lift weights, we tear our muscles,
Yeah.
literally tear our muscles. We do that because once we tear them, as long as we give them proper recovery, they will grow.
Yeah.
It's not different with our own experience and our whole human kind of beingness.
Yeah, yeah, that's really important. And I know that you've referenced in your book quite a few times is Andrew Huberman, and I think in
Yeah.
a podcast he spoke about also. There's a big difference between you know choosing stress like the cold shower, and that being
Hmm.
really actually helpful to our resilience because we place ourselves and experience stress on our terms, and that actually helps us when stress comes up because we're more practiced in it.
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
it's true. And Andrew, I mean, Andrew's such a great friend. We've had so many conversations about this, and one of these ideas is you can actually practice stress a little bit. You can practice stepping into this stuff, and as long as you're cognizant while doing so, you can start to understand. Okay, this is what this feels like. I know how to work through this.
Mm.
I can start to generate some tools so I can move through this. And in many cases, it does help to get you more prepared for for uncertainty hitting you.
Yeah, it's funny. I run ultra marathons on the trails, and I go out by myself and run. And you know, a leader that I work with, he did a couple of Ironmans with me, and he actually would say that the Ironmans and training for them helped him build the resilience at work because even though it was physical resilience he'd built, that the idea that he'd overcome and was overcoming a lot physically actually held him in good stead when he was in a meeting when he was challenged. Like he could step into that stress easily.
Totally. I think there's certain athletic endeavors that actually do this more and better than others. And I think Ironman is one of the great examples because how many Ironmans have you done that have gone exactly as you planned them to? Right? I would bet the answer is zero, right? Which
Yeah.
means you're not only physically stressing yourself, you're dealing with uncertainty and adapting and things like that. Another great sport is fighting, MMA or wrestling, right?
Yeah.
When you're the guys who do that, I don't do it, but but the guys who do that, they are not they certainly they have some skills that they train in.
Yeah.
The right hook, the right jab, whatever moves they have, right? But they're what their opponent is going to do is unknown to them. They are
Mm.
constantly adapting. They're constantly reading the environment, adapting, changing, and training themselves. It's actually one of the reasons why they've done studies on who makes it through SEAL training, and they haven't had a lot of success in identifying a key set of attributes. But in terms of the sports, they found that wrestlers have a higher propensity
Yeah.
to make it
Okay.
through
Yeah.
SEAL training than other athletic other sports. And I'm convinced that one of the reasons because as wrestlers, you're just constantly adapting. I mean, you never
Mm.
know.
Yeah.
You're constantly, and it's you're also physically being worked. So you're in this hugely tough physical environment, and you're adapting it as well. I mean, so it has great analogies to the
Yeah.
beaches of
Absolutely.
SEAL training. So.
Yeah. Rich, how did you what was the work you had to do to get to the attributes? Like, was it just conceptual, observation of different people, or how much science did you put behind actually understanding what they really mean, how they work? What's that mix or blend that you've come up with those 25?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I would say it was the first part was just observation. Having done it in the SEAL teams and being able to think about it and process it. That was the first part. But I love neuroscience. I'm a neuroscience geek. That's why I hang out with guys like Huberman. And of course, Huber and I, as I wrote the book, he and I were talking a bunch as well. And I wanted to figure out why certain things happened in our system. Now, a lot of the neuroscience comes into play with the mental acuity attributes, obviously, and that's probably the most neuroscience heavy of the sections because we're dealing with how our brain processes the world. But I do think that our biochemistry has a lot to do with it, and again, there's a nature nurture. I wasn't able to dive into some of the psychological research that probably would have been cool to do. But I mean, there's a certain point where you have to say, hey, I gotta actually stop and start writing,
Yeah.
or else the book's never gonna get written. And I also wanted to make sure that I wrote it in a way that was understandable for most people. Again, there are certain books that can get a little too heavy. So, but yeah, it was a little bit of both.
Yeah. And I'd imagine then, Rich, you're trying to write the book that a leader or a parent or someone could take it and use it, not be so caught up in the science that it sounds great, but what do I do with it?
Well, it's funny. Some of my great friends who are authors, and they run the gamut. Like Simon Sinek is a great friend. He's always has been, and he writes some great books. And he always sprinkles a little neuroscience in
Mm.
his books. But then I have, another great friend is Dan Coyle, who wrote a book called The Talent Code and The Culture Code. And another great friend is Stephen Kotler, who wrote a book called
Mm.
Rise of Superman and Stealing Fire. And those two guys go a lot deeper into neuroscience. Dan a little less, and then Stephen really goes deep. And so as when you have mentors like that, you say, okay, how can I, I like them all. So how can I kind of do a little bit of whatever they're all doing? And what's interesting is that I've had people come to me and say, hey, I love the book. A little bit heavy on the neuroscience stuff. I checked out a little bit on that, but it was awesome. And I've had other people say, "Hey, I love the neuroscience stuff. I wish you had gone deeper." So when you have people with both polarities, you realize you probably hit a good balance because
Yeah.
I just like that. I would never write a book without some of that in there because I don't want to feel or sound like an armchair quarterback. And I know people would never argue with me because obviously I was a Navy SEAL, so like, well, you obviously have the experience in these attributes, but I think science also tells the story, and science can help sometimes explain some of those things that even we as SEALs experienced.
Yeah, man, and I guess you got to lean into your attribute of authenticity when you write it too, which
Yeah,
has got to be for you. So I
that's
think
right. That's right.
that's important. One of the things, you did some work for the Cotton Group and it was really well received, but probably when I got around the leaders to ask what they loved about your talk, one of the things that really came up was you talked about leadership and you talked about this concept of it being a blob. That was sort of
Yes.
the
Yes.
thing that they really loved and then probably took from that more than anything was this concept. Would you mind explaining what that is and what you mean by that?
I'd be happy to. So this stemmed from well, I kind of figured this out when I was running the SEAL training I was running. One of the key things that you had to train guys in to do was close quarter combat, which is really the art and skill of clearing a room to a building when you're rescuing hostages, you're finding a bad guy. You got to go room to room, right? It's a very complex environment where you have live fire going on. You're going in with people with guns, and you have to be very coordinated, and it's a very dynamic, very rapid environment. So the training for that is very precise. And I remember doing this, and I was watching as I'd watch guys, either whether I'd be doing it or I'd watch guys doing it. You could have seen it better, and that hit me. Several years later, after I was out of the Navy, I was in front of a group of executives who asked me to write down on a whiteboard. Again, I had a whiteboard next to me, what the task organization would look like for a high performing team like the SEAL team. And of course, I had some models, but the models didn't fit. The hierarchical pyramid, of course, is the most well known model. The leader sits on top and all the word filters down. That's obviously not how a high performing team works. It's too slow, it's too bureaucratic. There's the flat model where it's just a flat line. We're all in this together. No one outranks anybody. It's all groovy and cool. It's okay, but even that doesn't work because on that flat line, first of all, it's hard to figure out who's in charge, and communication, something can happen on that right side of that line that's not seen or heard by the left, right? So communications, it can get siloed, and that's not how a high performing team operates. And of course, I had the servant leadership model, which was Robert Greenleaf's
Yeah.
upside down pyramid, where let's flip this, the leader's on the bottom, leader supports everybody. That's probably the nicest one. And if you're going to adopt any one of those three, adopt that one. However, it's still not how a high performing team operates because in a high performing team, burden is distributed. It's not all on one person. So really, largely in frustration, I just drew a blob. I looked at what looked like an amoeba, and I said to the group, I said, where do you think the leader sits in this blob? And I had answers like, front, back, center, top, bottom. I said, all of you are correct. The leader's wherever the leader needs to be in the moment. And this is a concept called dynamic subordination. Dynamic subordination means that a team understands that problems, issues, and challenges can come from any angle at any moment. And when one does, the person who's closest to that problem and the most capable immediately steps up and takes charge and takes lead, and everybody follows, right? And then the environment shifts again, and someone else steps up and takes charge, and everybody follows. It's a dynamic swap between leader and follower. I also call it alpha swapping, where that alpha position just hops to where it needs to be. And so this is exactly how a SEAL team operates. When we're doing close quarter combat, people have seen this on TVs and movies. You'll see a group of soldiers stacked outside of a door, like 1, 2, 3, 4. And when they go in, they go 1, 2, 3. And when you go in, you're basically number one man peels right, number two man peels left, three man right again. So you're kind of peeling off based on what the person in front of you did. Well, when you get into that room, right, the number one man might be over on the right side of that room, but the next threat, which could be the next open doorway, could be on the left side of the room, which means now the number four man becomes number one man, right? And they
Mm.
all stack again, right? So that alpha position is constantly swapping, and that's how that works. A civilian way to kind of understand this a little bit more simply would be to think of the commercial airliner, right? None of us would debate the fact that the captain of that airplane is in charge, right? No one debates that
Yeah.
fact. However, if the captain's taxiing out to take off and gets a call from the maintenance guy back at the
Yeah.
maintenance shack and says, "Hey, there's something wrong with your aircraft. You need to turn around." Well, no captain worth their wings is going to ignore that. They're immediately going to turn around and go back. They're going to subordinate to that maintenance person, right? They take the plane back to the gate. They realize they have to deplane and get the passengers off to fix it. Well, captain doesn't take charge of that either. Now the flight attendant steps up, takes charge, right? While the plane deplanes. So the best teams are teams that actually dynamically subordinate. And to dynamically subordinate, you need a couple of things. First of all, you need to know every single member. We need to know what attributes and what skills you bring to the table. That needs to be worn on your sleeve, right?
Yeah.
And then you also need to know all of your strengths and all of your weaknesses. All of my weaknesses have to be laid out bare. All of my strengths have to be laid out bare, so that my teammates know exactly when I'm going to be leaning on them, and they know exactly when they can lean on me, right? So there's a vulnerability and a transparency that's implied and required for dynamic subordination that a lot of leaders don't understand. A lot of leaders look at vulnerability as the stigma thing, right? I don't want to show weakness, right? You picture this strong leader at the top of the mountain with everything. No, that's not the case at all, right? No team that really can endure very dynamic, very diverse, very high level stuff can operate that way. We all have to understand our vulnerabilities and our strengths and our weaknesses, and we're all there to support, to lead, to fall back, to all do all this, and that's how the best teams operate.
Yeah, Rich. It's just such a great description, and I love that you brought up the vulnerability. Like, I'm interested, Rich, in terms of the vulnerability piece, and I know, I've read Dan Coyle's culture code, and like they do, you guys did the after action reviews after a mission or whatever. That
Yeah.
vulnerability in the SEALs, like in what is a very masculine workplace, that vulnerability is essential for performance in that environment.
Yeah, it has to be, because again, and people ask sometimes, are SEALs humble, and if so, how do you stay humble? I will say, for the most part, SEALs are humble, right? There are exceptions. There are some arrogant guys out there. However, most of us are humble, and even the arrogant ones are still humble inside of the team room, inside of the environment. And one of the reasons is because the environment itself will kill you, right? In other words, anybody who likes the ocean, swims or surfs, for example, will agree with me that it doesn't matter how good of a swimmer you are. If you turn your back on the ocean, it will kill you. Right? It is an unforgiving environment. Well, same thing with combat, right? The 13-year-old Somali kid who's been given an AK-47 by the bad guy. One trigger pull and one properly placed bullet can kill a 35-year-old Navy SEAL who's vastly experienced. So the environment humbles you. In that type of environment where it's so life and death, there is no time to have ego. There's no time to get your feelings hurt if you screw up. There's no time for any of that, which means you have to be so vulnerable and so transparent about what you do and what you did. After action reports are constant, right? And you create a culture where, hey, the after action report is set up so it's to get ourselves better. It's not to point the finger at anybody. It's not to make anybody feel bad. It's all to get ourselves better. And when you have that environment, you have that culture inside of an organization. Doesn't matter if it's SEAL teams or any other organization. You create an environment of real trust and safety. So even the people who screwed up, they'll often be the first people to step up and say, "Hey, I screwed that up. Here's what I did. Here's what I need to do. I won't do it again." Blah blah blah. And it's just quick, and that's how the fastest, most efficient teams operate, with that kind of that constant AAR. And I think any organization that would like to try to begin to do this, they can implement this after action review process, something that the SEALs did after everything we did, no matter what it was, before we did anything, washed ourselves, washed our gear, put things away. We'd get into a huddle and we'd say, okay, what went right? What went wrong? What can we do better? Those are the three questions we asked. And we were just transparent about that, right? And that's an environment that can be created inside of an organization. The only prerequisite to that is trust and safety. Okay. In other words, if you don't have a trusted environment where people feel safe, you're not going to get the truth. People aren't going to step up, right? So as leaders, our responsibility is to build that environment first, and then start adding the after action stuff. Because until you build that environment, so one of the cool things in the SEAL teams is sometimes we do surveys, like, hey, how, like the CO would do this command climate survey, and and it'd be basically a sheet or a few sheets. Hey, how are we doing? What are your complaints? What are we doing wrong? All that stuff. It could get pretty brutal questions sometimes. And there was an option to do it anonymously, and no SEAL would ever do it anonymously. Well, why would I do it anonymously? I want people to know that I'm saying this, right? That's the culture you want. Hey, I want you to know what I'm saying because this is going to help, right? And if I'm screwing up, I want you to tell me what I'm doing wrong because I want to be helped here. And this is where vulnerability, this is where humility comes into play, right? Those are the best teams. But if you haven't set up that environment as the leader of trust and psychological safety, and people feel safe to step up, the AARs will be ineffective.
Do you think, like, Rich, because I love that so much, because I think so many, and I don't know what you see in America, so many teams don't have that culture of trust and safety. Firstly, as the starting point, people will just fill a survey out and tell them what they want to hear, or they just won't fill it out because they're disengaged. And that's a pretty good tell on either way. And then the ability to have real conversations to get real growth. Like, I'm interested in what the work you've done in, like, what are some of the big gaps that you're seeing in teams and leadership? Is that one of them, or are there other gaps that you see that are really striking?
Well, I mean, the biggest gap is when leaders don't understand what their position entails, right? They think of leadership as a position, and they wear it as a badge and as part of their identity. That's the number one problem you see. People get promoted and they're like, oh, now I'm something special. It's like, wait a second, no. In fact, you actually have to now step out of what you were doing, and really what causes this is that a lot of organizations set up their promotion systems on performance and specifically skills performance.
Yes,
In other words, the best performer promotes, right? And it has nothing to do with whether or not that person is good at leading people, right? And what happens when that type of environment is set up is you get someone who is awesome at what they do, and even if they're a great leader, but they're awesome at what they do, they get into a position of leadership, and then they feel like, oh, as a leader, I've got to show other people how to be awesome at what they do, that's completely not the job of a leader. The job of the leader is now to stop doing what you've been doing. Your job is fundamentally changed. Now your job is no longer to be awesome at what you did. Your job is to help others perform, help others, like encourage them and pick up the slack rather than micromanage, right? So this is where you get micromanagers versus true leaders. Is those micromanagers are the people who were awesome and now they're in a position of leadership and they think their job is to go nitpick what other people are doing, versus their real job is to start encouraging, setting up an environment to hopefully, and this is what the best leaders actually believe, have people outpace them and eventually replace them. I used to tell this to my junior officers. So you have to understand the irony of leadership. The irony of leadership is if you do your job correctly, you eventually work yourself out of a job. You create a team that doesn't have to rely on you. They don't need you anymore. In fact, they outpace you. And every leader should be excited for that to happen, right? If you're not excited for that to happen, you may be in the wrong position. I remember being just being in, doing the selection stuff and having these young officers come to the command, and I'm interviewing them or seeing them in this selection process. And I'm saying, my God, these guys are so much better than me. Yeah. And I get excited about that, right? Because I knew that they were going to just race by me and take the command into places I could never dream of. That should excite us as leaders, right? Because that's really our job.
Yeah. I see it so often, Rich, like you said, like leaders that attach to their skill set or their identity as success is what they could do as a buyer or what they could do as an accountant, their skills, and then they get insecure about that their success in their role is no longer dependent on their skills. That's right. How they develop the skills of others, and they struggle with that.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's now a completely different model. It's a completely different job description, and that's why we need to. Most organizations that are having trouble, they don't promote their leaderships the right way, and this is where you have to look at attributes. Again, attributes start telling us whether or not someone can be a great leader, because attributes, so you start seeing things like empathy and selflessness and authenticity. Those three things have very little to do with how well you sell something or how well you make this widget or whatever, right? But you can have a widget maker who is really great at what they do, and on the periphery, you're like, oh my gosh, look how empathetic that person is. Look how selfless that person is. I'm highlighting that person as a potential to come up and be a leader, right? Regardless of how well they make their widget, because they're showing me the attributes that leaders require. And I'd say some of our best leaders are the leaders who get into leadership positions and they have no clue about what the people that they're leading do. They have no clue, right? Because the first thing they have to do in that position is say, oh, tell me what you know, right? Show me what you do. You have to almost subjugate yourself. You have to show vulnerability in that environment. And that's why some of the best leaders are people who can't even do what those people are doing. And I count myself in that situation. As an officer in the SEAL teams, I couldn't do what my snipers did. I couldn't do what my breachers did, right? These guys were just so damn good at what they did. I mean, I knew a little bit about it, and sure, I could muddle my way through. It was ugly, but I needed them, and I think that's the most important thing a leader can say to their people is the three words: "I need you."
Yeah, yeah, and I was going to ask that, Rich, in terms of do you need to have some competence to lead a team? Like, for you, you were in the SEALs, you'd done BUD, so you had an understanding. But would you feel confident to go into the fashion industry or to something completely new and be able to pick up a leadership position based on having the attributes needed to be a good people leader?
I would say the answer is yes, but it also depends on the complexity and the seriousness of the environment. So, in other words, you know, and I wouldn't sit here and pretend to know how serious the fashion industry is, right? But I know that like a great fashion leader might not be able to come over and lead a SEAL platoon, right?
Yeah,
Because
gotcha.
there's some competence in there that has to be required, and I would assume in most endeavors there's a little bit of competence. But I think the higher you get, and the more distant the leader is from the actual doing the thing, the more likely that person is going to be able to step into the position, be a great leader, and do what leaders supposed to do. So it really depends on that distance from doing the thing, you know. And if there's enough of the distance from the actual skills piece, then yeah, anybody with great leadership attributes can lead anything.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Before we go, Rich, I wanted just to touch, I think the listeners would love to understand a bit too of your perspective on peak performance connected to optimal performance and how you see this differently. It was interesting. I was working with a team yesterday and they were talking about how they've been in peak for 2 years. And I was listening to I was listening to your book actually yesterday, and it's like, you know, I actually pulled them up and said, well, you know, peak's an apex. You're up,
Yeah.
You perform for a short period of time and then you've got to go back down.
Yep.
2 years is a long time to be in peak.
And I guarantee that person wasn't.
Yeah, that's right.
That's impossible, right?
Yeah.
So, no, it's true. I mean, the problem is peak performance gets mixed up with really what we're talking about, and that's optimal. So peak, again, it's an apex. The only place you can go from an apex is down. And peak has to be scheduled for, has to be planned for, has to be prepared for. The professional football player spends his entire week prepping and planning so they can peak for 3 hours on Sunday or game day, right? Optimal performance is different. Optimal performance is I'm going to do the very best. It's kind of over. It's over everything. It's I'm going to do the very best in the moment, whatever the best looks like in that moment. And that the best could look like peak, right? Everything's clicking and flow states and all that stuff. But sometimes our best is literally like I'm head down and I'm nugging it out. I'm going step by step, and it's dirty and it's ugly and it's hard, right? That is also performing optimally, okay? And so what optimal performance allows us to do is a couple things. First of all, it allows us to celebrate those times when we actually weren't feeling very peak, but we were still making it happen, right? And I can, you know, I know many times in the SEAL teams, right, we'd be in environments and be like, man, that was ugly, that was hard, right? But we did it, right? There was nothing peak about what we were doing, but we did it, right? Even all of us as human beings through COVID, okay, the first day of quarantine, I guarantee none of us were at peak, okay? We were just doing the best we could. That's okay, all right? So it allows us to celebrate those. More importantly, it allows us what I call proper energy management, okay? I don't need to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store. I just don't need to. I can be at a different energy level. And one of the myths that people might think about Navy SEALs, military maybe totally, but certainly Navy SEALs, because they see it in the TV and the movies, is you see a bunch of Navy SEALs before they go on a mission, and they're like in a huddle, hoo-yawing and high-fiving and screaming like a football team getting ready to take the field. That's not how it is at all, right? In fact, most of the time we'd be in helicopters flying into combat, and the guys would be asleep. They'd be napping, okay? And the reason why they're napping is because they don't know what's going to be required. They're saving every ounce of energy. In fact, they're trying to gain energy. We don't know how long we're going to be out there. We don't know what's going to be required. I'm not going to waste energy when I don't need to waste energy. So optimal performance allows us to modulate our energy in very responsible ways so we can peak on demand and we can recover on demand, and we can be, normal in certain areas. And that's probably what that guy, if he was peaking for 2 years and he wasn't burnt out, then he wasn't really peaking.
No.
He was probably modulating. He just didn't know it.
Yeah. And I remember reading a book called The Power of Full Engagement, which is really focused on energy management. And I think that's one thing that you talk about that a lot of leaders don't understand, that, they'll be focused on managing time, but
Yeah.
time's only as relevant as the energy you put into that particular moment. And then
Right.
what you're sort of saying is understanding the most important moments of the day. And for many leaders, they'll know their meetings that are the peak meetings. It's different to a SEAL. There's not as much uncertainty, but making sure that you can bring your best energy, the energy required to that meeting, but that there's recovery pre or post.
In between.
To be there, you can't be on all day.
Well, and that helps in so many different facets. I mean, most of us as parents, for example, want to be at our peak when we come home to our kids, right? But most of us who spend a day at work aren't. We come home, we're exhausted, right? And we don't, and maybe we're so exhausted that we're actually short-tempered with our kids because we're done, right? We're afraid, we're frazzled because we've been pushing ourselves at this pace the whole day. We haven't taken time to say, what do I require in this moment? Okay, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. Sometimes it means I'm gonna just take 5 minutes and just meditate for a second, right? It might be I'm gonna take a walk. It might be, hey, I have these emails to write. I can be at moderate power doing these emails. I don't have to be like all charged up. I can just be kind of loose and calm. Might be, hey, I have a couple meetings I have to be at peak at, so I'm going to peak at those. But if we understand how to begin to charge ourselves throughout our day, then we maximize our energy expenditures or minimize our energy expenditures, or I guess optimize, right? But then we actually can build up charge at different points. So when we go home to our families, now we have some energy. We can say, okay, I'm ready. I can do this. I'm guilty of it as much as anybody, coming home. Well, not anymore. I get to work at home, right? But coming home and just being short, being snippy because I just spent so much during the day. And that's stealing time from those people who are most important to us.
Do you find that, because I'm exactly the same, Rich, I work at home, and I actually used to enjoy the drive. And what I would do is if I had emails or calls, I'd park about 10 minutes from home.
Mm-hmm.
I'd answer anything that needed to be answered, and I'd do a little bit of breath work, and then I'd basically set intention that the next 2 hours, 3 hours is dedicated to the kids. So everything went away.
Yes.
And that was their time. Now, when I work at home, that you don't have that drive, and it's sort of out of the office straight into home. And I'm trying to find a little practice before turning the computer off to reset the energy of what's needed to go inside. But the proximity so close now.
It's tougher. It's tougher. Yeah, and I get it. It's how old are your kids, by the way?
Well, I've got 5, and they range from 14 to 6. And
okay.
and they're homeschooled, so they're home all the time as well.
Yeah. Okay, so so that is a tough. One of the toughest things about COVID, for example, was that we lost our ability to shift between contexts and categories in our environments. In other words, we could go to work and now we're in work mode, right? And then we leave work and now we're in home mode, right? And I remember just being in quarantine. I was still writing the book, and so I'd go from writing the book to talking to my editor to helping my son with algebra to making lunch. I mean, you're just task switching all the time. So this is where we got very exhausted, right? Because task switching takes a lot of mental energy. And so yes, when we're home, my kids are 17 and 15, so they're a little less needy nowadays. But it's still there's a balance there. And I think the hardest thing for me has been, okay, when I get into work mode, I need to be in work mode and not get distracted by home mode, right? Can I make that shift in a responsible manner, lock in, focus, and then shift out? And so, it's a constant struggle. But I think there are some people who are much better at it than others. There are some people who love being at home. They manage that very well. There are some people who love going to the office. They need to go different places. And then most of us, I think, the majority of us do the best we can with what we got. I'm very grateful to be working at home now, and so I love just doing the best with what I got. I don't regret. I don't miss. My drive wasn't that long anyway, so I didn't get to really get into podcasts. So I don't miss it.
Rich, thanks. This has been an incredible insight into who you are and what you do. I just wanted, before we go, you do virtual consulting, virtual workshops. So to an audience in Australia or wherever, if people want to understand the attributes work, understand the work you do, like I know you've got workbooks, assessments, you've got a whole bunch of stuff where people can engage at a really cost-effective price up initially to see what it is, and then what does that look like?
Yeah. Theattributes.com is the one-stop shop. You can find the book there. You can find out about a little bit what we do. You can fill out a form to contact us and get us on the phone. We can tell you a little bit more. But yeah, we have workshops where we can give content virtually. We can do virtual consulting. We do a lot of in-person consulting. It's on my bucket list to get out to Australia at some point. So if someone wants to do some in-person work, I'm down for it. But we will help organizations go in and figure out their attributes. We'll help and coach them as they figure out which roles they might need to look at specifically, help them with hiring processes. We can do keynotes, we can do workshops. There's the book. We have assessment tools. One is free on the website right now. We're just getting ready. I'm hoping in the next month, maybe month and a half, we're going to deploy our newest assessment tool. It'll be a 360 assessment that helps people measure their leadership and team ability attributes.
That's awesome.
That took a little longer because again, leadership and team ability attributes have to be assessed by others. we can't self-assess, right? So, but we're almost done with that. That's getting ready. We're going to deploy that. So we have a lot of offerings. Theattributes.com is the best way to see that and get in contact with us. And if you fill out one of those forms, you'll talk directly to either me or my wife because we're running the whole thing.
Yeah, and I just downloaded the workbooks this morning, and they're great. Like the workbooks are these sort of 9-page deep dives into certain aspects. So, and I found them just a quick look, but there's some good exercises like that you can self do, like, and quite, there's a lot of depth in there.
Yeah, that it's, if you want to figure out, and if you're just curious, you can take those assessments. Again, they're free. I would recommend reading the book first so you have a good idea of what the attributes are, but you don't have to. You can go take that. We just appreciate anybody who comes and takes a visit. You can sign up for the newsletter. We're gonna actually get even more newsletters here coming this fall. So all that stuff. And I just want to express my gratitude to you for being such a great supporter of us and the book, and just an honor to be with you today. So
no, thanks, Rich. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Luke.